Hi, everybody. I have the pleasure to open this second conference of the UNESCO Bernard Maris Chair. Next week, we invited Andres Rodriguez-Pons, and this week we welcome Simona Yamarino and Peter Berkowicz. Of course, I will let Ron introduce our prestigious guests, so Simona and Peter, who will deal today on the issue, a very important issue of inequalities. Inequalities were already a key research topic for Bernard Maris when he was professor at Sciences Po Toulouse. And this conference of today is in line with the works of Thomas Piketty and Joseph Stiglitz we invited last year. And at Sciences Po, we believe that economic geography and economics of innovation can provide important answers to the issue of growing inequalities. Because more than in the past, intellectual capital and property rights, as well as the rise of public incentives for innovation in big techs, can explain the concentration of capital in a smaller and smaller number of hands. And more than in the past too, the industrial dynamics of big techs and digital platforms, which both are driven by strong network externalities, give rise to a growing concentration of rents and a dynamics of wages and land prices, which increase inequalities within and between regions. So many questions related to regulation and policy have to be addressed on that topics in a context where cohesion, inclusion are more important than ever for the well-being of our societies. I think this question will be addressed today by Simona and by Peter. But I say no more, and I thank again the partners for supporting the activities of the chair, Sciences Po Toulouse, and our local institutions. And I give now the floor to Ron to introduce the conference and introduce our guest. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you, Jeroen. I'm sharing now my screen. I hope that works.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good evening to all of you. Very nice to have you here with us in this wonderful event. For the next 2 hours, we will talk on big tech and inequalities, which of course is a major theme which we can read about on a daily basis in the media. So it's a very important topic, a very relevant topic, and we are also very pleased to have excellent speakers that really have a lot of expertise in that. Let me just introduce a bit, or maybe take up what Jeroen already said, is I'm very honored and I'm very privileged to be the Bernard Maris Chair holder in Sciences Po Toulouse at Les Reps. I'm very happy and very honored. As I said, I'm doing that for about 3 years, and in 2018 we had a wonderful event in Toulouse where we launched the chair. Also, when the family of Bernard Maris was present, a wonderful event in which we had a lot of very interesting discussions. Around the chair, we have developed three key themes, and we decided to focus on one particular theme each year. So in the first year, it was all about sustainable transitions in territories. So it was really about greening our economies, how to promote sustainability at the regional scale. Of course, again, a very important topic that we all want to know more about. Then last year, it was more on inequalities and regional development, but of course, due to Corona, we had to extend that a bit as well at the same time. So therefore, also today, we will focus a lot of attention on that. And the next coming year, we will focus on crisis, COVID crisis in particular, and how countries and regions respond to that. Of course, a big topic right now, and which will be on our scientific, but also on our policy agenda for the next coming years. So as I said, we had this kickoff meeting in November 2018. It was a wonderful meeting. We had very many distinguished speakers. Jeroen was one of them, but also my good friend and colleague, Pierre-Alex Ballan from Utrecht University. Peter was there as well. Peter, I am sure you remember. There was Raquel Ortega Aguiles from the University of Birmingham, who gave a keynote there. The same David Rigby from the UCLA, and Lea Fumschilling from Lund University in Sweden. That was, I still remember that as one of the best events I ever had. So it was really a very nice event that was a perfect kickoff of the chair. We had then meetings in April 2019 on sustainable transitions. A guest professor that we invited was Lars Koene from the University of Melbourne. Now he has returned to Europe. He's working in Norway again. But at that time he was still affiliated to Melbourne. And he had some really nice interventions on sustainability transitions. Then we had a November meeting in 2019 on innovation, geography, and inequalities, and we had two guest professors invited. One of them was Elisa Giuliani, that you all know very well from her excellent work on capitalism and maybe the dark sides of capitalism, very much on this topic right now, looking at human rights, but also on irresponsible capitalism. And there was Neil Lee from the London School of Economics, who was really, of course, and being an expert on regional inequality, has done a lot of empirical studies on that at the same time. So that was a wonderful event. Then we had other events during the years with very distinguished speakers, all, let's say, scientific heroes of mine. Michel Aglietta on inclusive and sustainable development, well known from the famous regulation theory. I'll call Joseph Stiglitz, no need to introduce, of course, a Nobel Prize winner in economics from Columbia University. Well, now the current star in economics, right? Thomas Piketty on his book Capital and Ideology. We had a wonderful event in Toulouse some time ago. And Katerina Pistor from Columbia University focusing on how law creates wealth and inequalities. Well, for those of you who attended our workshop last week, there was Andres speaking on COVID-19 and the futures of cities. And we had a wonderful discussion with Rudiger Arendt from the OECD. But today, we have another wonderful event that we are very much looking forward to. Two excellent speakers. I see now, Simona, that your first name has been, there are two M's instead of one, but anyway, everybody knows you. And we speak to Berkowitz. So let me just briefly introduce Simona, of course. Again, no need to introduce her. She's so well known in our community. Used to work for Spru, but moved already some time ago to the LSE, became their professor of economic geography, former head of the Department of Geography and Environment at the LSE. She has also affiliate faculty member at the Gran Sasso Science Institute at L'Aquila in Italy. She has just taken up a new job, becoming editor of the Journal of Economic Geography. So she will have many sleepless nights, if only for that reason. Okay, I just put one slide, but of course I could have put 10 or 25 slides to introduce her. Many seminal publications, but to me, one of the outstanding ones really is the book that she did with Phil McCann on 2013 on multinationals and economic geography, which is, I think, really Simona's topic on location, technology, and innovation. It was a wonderful book. giving a very few overview, but also going beyond that. So if you want to, if you didn't know the book yet, but I'm sure you do, but if you don't know, you should definitely read it. So Simona will kick off our meeting. We'll do a presentation on big tech and inequalities, regional inequalities in the US. And after that, Peter Bergowitz will take over. Also, a very well-known figure working at the European Commission at DG Regional and Urban Policy, leading the head of the Competence Center for Smart and Sustainable Growth. Peter has been very much involved in the formulation of smart specialization strategies, among other things. So he's so well known for that, has very strong expertise. I think he is the one, if you want to know something about smart specialization policy, he is the one to contact. So send an email to him if you have any questions about that. And before that, Peter was head of the unit for policy development, also at the European Commission, where he was very much involved in the reform of cohesion policy in the years 2014-2020. So we have two excellent speakers. Nothing can go wrong here. So I'm very pleased that both of them have accepted our invitation. So we are really looking forward to their interventions. As I said, Simona will start, then Peter will take over, and then there is a lot of opportunities to raise questions that can be done. You can send questions to us, and then I will make a selection of those questions and put them forward to Simona and Peter. And we already agreed that we will especially address the most complex questions to the both of them. All right, very good. I've spoken enough. I will now give the floor to my very good friend Simona. Simona, please take the floor. I'm stop sharing now.
Yeah.
Here you go.
I'm sharing now. Let's. Okay, and now it should be okay. You see, full screen. Great. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ron and Jérôme and Sciences Po Toulouse and the whole organization behind for inviting me. It's a big honor, and it's also a big pleasure because I have friends right here and also Peter. And it's actually interesting because it's the first time that with Peter, we don't talk about Europe. So we are a bit outside our terrain, let's say, today. However, this is a topic that was developed in a paper, and when I gave the abstract and the title to Ron and Jérôme, I didn't know that the paper was going to come out, and that was before Christmas, and the paper was published right on the 31st of December. So I normally do not like to present papers that are out, but I was bound, and it was, a rather short time. And so I will also, this presentation is based on the Cambridge Journal of Region, Economy and Society paper with my co-author Marianne Feldman and Frederick Guy. But then I will conclude by shifting on the follow-up paper, co-author by Marianne and Frederick, and also by Caroline Yoramashvili, who is a PhD student almost finishing at the LSE. So it's a topic we started actually thinking of in a wonderful night in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And it started as a chat, and then it became something more. So what are the topics here? We all know rising income, spatial inequality. Jérôme and Ron have mentioned that. frequent failure of local development policies, not always, Peter, I have to say, but I mean, there are some bottlenecks. And so we propose an explanation that is based on three interacting forces. Agglomeration economies that we all know, crucial to firms' productivity, wealth of places. Monopoly and technology, the return of monopoly. So growth of market power of particularly non-financial corporation, we focus on that. Big tech, not only big tech, but particularly big tech. And financialization of the economy, the enlarged role played by finance in the real economy over the last few decades. And we started talking about the world since Thatcher and Reagan. And so we were in the US when this idea precisely was born. The US is probably the most emblematic case talking about big tech, right? Although probably not the only one. And this was the sentence that we were commenting that night with Marianne and Frederick. Hillary Clinton speaking in Mumbai 2018, it was in fact summer 2018, I won the places that own 2/3 of America's gross domestic product. I won the place that are optimistic, diverse, dynamic, moving forward. And his whole campaign, Make America Great Again, was looking backwards. So let's look backwards. Okay, this is a map. is a very nice map of commuting zone. Okay, commuting zone are 709 in the US. These are areas that are weighted by population. And you can see here basically represented the proportion of employees that earn more than the 80th percentile in 1980, okay, looking backwards. And you can see basically the map represent the top 20% earners in the US. And you can see that in 1980, there are various areas, right? The concentration of these top 20 earners are, for example, you can see that small area east of Chicago is Gary, Indiana, a steel manufacturing center, Detroit, obviously, and some areas on the coast. Now let's look at later, precisely when Hillary Clinton and Trump were discussing, let's say, 2016. And you can see that the colors have changed quite dramatically, okay? And we can see that the top 20% of earners shifted to Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the big area of Silicon Valley, okay? And Washington, D.C. One, we argue, is home of monopoly on the West Coast, and on the East Coast, the other is, let's say, the protector of monopolies. It's interesting to see the change from 1980 to 2016, okay? And we can see precisely why some places are optimistic, diverse, dynamic, moving forward, and some others instead are not. And you can see the decline of the Midwest of the US, Detroit, Indiana, precisely the top concentration of earners, of the top earners in the 80s have lost, while looking to the change, the big winners are precisely Washington, D.C., the area of San Francisco, San Jose, Boston, and some also you can see more to the east of the map, secondary hubs in banking, Charlotte, North Carolina, precisely, technology, Seattle, and the triangle of North Carolina again, Austin, and some parts, some tech cluster of Texas, okay? Now, it's not really only a matter of large cities here, because big cities like Detroit or Atlanta, Georgia, actually lost, okay? Is more looking at the cities that host the headquarters of firms with monopoly power. Why this work? Well, it was precisely a reflection of this geography of rising inequality that is not only in the US, but also Europe. And, you know, the literature, looking at the literature, obviously we find a lot of contribution by a lot of very good colleagues and dear friends. Differences, for example, in employment opportunity, erosion of wages, impact of housing prices, mortgage financing, the impact of the big recession in 2008 and later, skill bias, technological change has been, you know, there as a big force behind inequalities for a long time. Globalization forces, erosion of institutions. Yet, by looking very carefully at the economic geography, regional studies literature of the last 20 years, you see very rare links between agglomeration economies and monopoly power. Monopoly power, in particular, focusing on new information-based technology and financialization. So monopoly, agglomeration, financialization. There is quite a big literature on monopoly or financialization, respectively, in economics or finance, but the link with the geography and agglomeration economies was simply not there. And so we really thought, okay, we think that market structure, market power is something that is instead very visible and prominent in the real world. So increasing returns to place, okay, agglomeration economies, we all know a lot about it. These are external to firms, right? By definition, agglomeration economies, localization economies in the Marshallian sense are benign forces that comes from specialized labor, value chain proximity, knowledge spillovers. And on the other hand, we know also big cities, urbanizations, obviously bigger, the bigger, the more diverse, and diversity is good for growth and development. All this amplified, obviously, by globalization, increased local specialization within global production network, global value chains. Lots of my work has been precisely on multinational corporations and their role as flagship in all these networks and their relationship with specific places. So obviously technology creates this greater complexity and this finest division of labor across geography, reduced communication and transport costs, therefore higher speed, and also boosting this spreading across national borders of production. We saw also international reduced tariff, regulation barriers, and therefore also multinational corporations looking for some kind of arbitrage across different regulatory systems. And this spatial concentration at the global level, but very concentrated, what is being named concentrated dispersion by Dieter Ernst and Kim, of the highest value-added functions. Now, how do you fix this spatial inequality when it is due to increasing return to place, external to firms, okay? Well, in a nutshell, right? Make your place better and therefore specialize smartly, diversify, reform institution, invest in innovation, human capital, entrepreneurship, attract foreign firms and foreign capital. Or others have also said, move to the big city, okay? So the point is, the main argument that we do in this paper is that, you know, this policy in fact treat agglomeration economies and the resulting increasing returns as attributes of places, okay, external to the firms. However, in strict combination of this with this agglomeration economies, we see monopoly, which is increasing returns internal to the firm, okay? And therefore, the interplay technology business structure, we have seen in this interplay, this rising information-based network industries, platform monopoly strategies. By this, I mean platforms. There is a rather precise definition in our work. I mean, business models based on linking two sides of a transaction, parties, customers and suppliers, right? Amazon in the marketplace, or friends on Facebook, okay? Search on Google. Closely related and basically same kind of platform are the businesses that are based on proprietary general purpose software, such as Microsoft, okay, core business Microsoft, or Windows operating system, Office. Precisely, they are not connecting two sides, but they are vendor, customer and sellers, but they are based on networks, in the sense that existing users benefit when the number of users on the network rises, okay? So what we see is an interaction between these networks externalities and agglomeration externalities, or if you want, a sort of interaction between increasing returns external to the firm and internal to the firm, which are amplified by financialization, okay? And this will come just a little later. At the same time, in the US in particular, I mean, this in the case of the US, we have seen 3/4 of all US industries became much more concentrated over the 2000s, okay? Particularly, this has been shown in digital intensive industries, okay? And you can see here the marks up, okay, since the times of Reagan in 1980, going up and up and up. This is just an indication of monopolies. Monopoly nowadays is not only markup, but a sort of winner takes all game, the game of the superstar firms, according to author, okay? So, what changed in this time? Precisely in the 80s, there was the Chicago School and Bork, right? That basically introduced in the thinking about antitrust in the US, the idea that everything that you require basically to harm customers in order to be considered by antitrust regulations. And therefore, we saw basically that the cases of antitrust over since, let's say, the 90s onwards, just pursued by the Federal Trade Commission, dried up progressively, okay? Deregulation in many ex-monopolies, the old network industries, expanded intellectual property rights, because these platforms are based precisely, are information based, okay? They put gates on the circulation, diffusion of new ideas, innovations and technologies. So monopoly models of the information age are not only the platform that and the tech giants where we focus on, okay? There are precisely those that I was mentioning, but also a lot of other smaller firms, okay? Like TripAdvisor or Airbnb, Uber, that in a way or in another draws kind of sucks income and revenue from a lot of many small, even micro providers across the world, right? I mean, little company like Airbnb or Booking.com take between 15 and 25% from the provision of lodging by hundreds of thousands of independent operators or renters around the world. Okay, so you can see there are other monopolies based on intellectual property, those based on precisely, I mean, the intellectual property rights, such as, you know, pharma, biotech. So there are different categories. We focus on the big tech in particular. So this is to give you precisely a measure of monopoly. Okay, this is you can see here the US, the top, the big US non-financial, non-oil, okay, because otherwise the picture changes, in 1976 and 2016. And here you have simply, you know, a chart that puts labor and market valuation over GDP, okay? So basically, you can see the shift, so the fall in terms of employment in 1976, the two with the highest market valuation, this is interesting actually, IBM and AT&T were both based on network products, but you can see that what happens in 2016 is that 7 of the 8, apart from General Electric, are based on network products, and at the same time, the employees, but the labor goes down while the market valuation, okay, is growing almost 5 times with respect to the 70s. So this gives an idea of what is happening, what is the trend. Another interesting indicator here is looking at the change of market power. And here we have the change in the ratio of market value to book value of asset, basically market capitalization, so what the company is worth on the stock market. Therefore, this map represents only listed firms, okay, listed companies. And so all the white and gray that you see are all those community zones that do not have more than 5 non-financial firms listed, and therefore in the CompuStat. These are the CompuStat-based maps. And so, and then the book value of asset of the firms are the company tangible and intangible assets, okay, owned. So the bigger the difference, obviously, the higher this ratio, the higher the entry barriers, basically, is a measure of monopoly. And this, we calculate this ratio aggregating by commuting zone area, right? And and we consider the change between 1980 and 2016. And you can see that the large rise in the ratio, okay, are the technology heavy cluster cities, okay, and on the West Coast and the Northeast. And the decline is again very much concentrated in the Midwest and in the South, apart from, yeah, Miami, Atlanta. So this gives you again a geographical idea of how market power has been increasing in all this time. Okay. So Marshallian externalities meet monopoly power, okay? When agglomeration of economies activity meets monopoly, this external return interacts with internal increasing returns of companies, okay? And this amplification of agglomeration productivity advantage is precisely what is indicated in the literature. Winner takes all. Takes the best talent, the top 20 earners, the latest information, latest knowledge, the buzz, okay? And also important, the market for startups, for new small firms, highly innovative, okay? This will be seen later in this second work that is a follow-up. The startup objective is to sell to bigger company. This is very visible in San Francisco. My husband, who is a co-author, Frederick, is from San Francisco, so we go there regularly. And in fact, is palpable. Is you can feel it in the air, really. I mean, all these very, very young entrepreneurs, this startup made by 2 PhD in physics and engineering, that are there just aiming to sell to the big companies. Okay, Google, Apple, Facebook objectives is acquire or kill. There is quite very recently church precisely on acquisition, mergers and acquisition, and the killer spaces of strategies of this big tech. Both strategies obviously benefits a lot from geographical co-location and the proximity to venture capital. Now, what harm monopoly does is something that is very well known. Okay, the huge polarization of income, living standard within rich, growing tech clusters or cities, which typically see immediately housing crisis. Right, many people who are not sharing the returns, the combination of the returns to monopoly are those that are pushed out, basically, cannot afford living in the city or in the cluster or in the area any longer, okay, are pushed out. Some actually are even pushed out from the house market in general. And this is an interesting thing that maybe we can discuss also later. This general deleterious effect of monopoly power have been studying a lot in academic work, higher prices, lower innovation, and so on and so forth. And then we highlight in particular specific effect of places outside the tech clusters, and actually we argue outside also the finance and government clusters, because the three are actually interlinked. Places sometimes called left behind, precisely in the terms of my colleague and friend Andres Rodrigo Esposa, but we argue could also be called held back, okay, by this sucking of resources. Finance, this is the three leg of the stool in our reasoning, okay? Finance, there is a big literature, okay, that points to the evolution of corporate governance, agency problem, the free cash flow assets that have to be, stripped away from the competitive sector, separated for firm because they are more valuable, more productive if invested elsewhere and outside of the firm, okay? And we have seen progressively over time, particularly visible in the US, but not only, reform to pensions, corporate governance, banking, and this influence of the financial sector over non-financial firms. With a growing monopoly, all these liquid or liquidable assets in competitive industries that are located also precisely in regions that are not necessarily the leading ones, look like free cash flows, strip assets and invest in promising high-tech startups. Now, this growing monopoly, startup perspective monopolies, okay, are investment that generates or are expected to generate very high returns, right? So finance and the financial system with all its innovation, particularly during the 90s, it facilitated this stripping asset from lower return firms, okay, operating a competitive market, and to the firms where precisely this expectation of growth are the highest. So inflow of capital to monopoly firms and places, outflows from other firms and places that are the held back. there is, there is a literature that looks into finance in particular, okay? And we have seen this on the newspapers increasingly, actually, even in the very recent press here in the UK, okay? The security, regulation, pension at risks. So all this has increased the power of finance on non-financial sectors and markets. Now, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, right? Financial dependence, okay? Financial dependence or financialization this is a very simple indicator that shows precisely when finance is disconnected from the real economy, from that economy that produces stuff, okay? So this is simply statistics that resembles a bit a Tobin Q, right? It's a Tobin Q, capital expenditure minus cash from operation in the numerator over capital expenditure. And this basically tells you that, I mean, if this index is either positive or negative, there is a dependence on the financial sector, in the sense that if it is positive, it means that the firm obviously it spends more than the revenue, its revenue, and therefore the capital expenditure are larger than its revenue, and therefore it has to go on the financial market in order to get funding. While if the ratio is negative, it means that the revenue of the firms surpass its capital expenditure, and therefore there is liquidity that is redistributed to the shareholders and anyway, I mean, redistributed and invested on the financial market. Now, the point here is that absence of financial dependence is obviously when this index is zero, okay? And so any departure from zero means a larger and larger reliance on precisely the financial market, okay? Moving, and therefore use of the financialization of the economy. Now, the implication of all this, well, economic development policy, as we said, treat these agglomeration economies as something that is attribute of places, okay? External to firms, even though they contribute to their success. This monopoly actively held back places in three different ways: appropriating revenues, which are taxed on almost all business activities around the world. So this is also important, that these monopolies, contrary to the old one types, I mean, electricity, public utilities, have a sort of geographical footprint that nowadays goes well beyond national boundaries. This is also the problem in tackling them. Restricting use of basic knowledge and thus degrading capabilities, because basically what the platform and network does is locking in precisely segments of, I mean, we all know, right, that many of these operating systems rely on Linux or other open source software. So locking in parts of the network is precisely, Martin Kenny has done a lot of very good work on that. And then diverting capital from other firms, regions, okay, in partnership with the financial sector. Precisely firms that produce things but are not spectacularly rewarding in the short term, such as some of the very, very tiny startup in tech are, and precisely investing in the potential monopolies of the future. So this is a redistribution of world wealth, okay, to shareholders, employees of platforms. So those that are the talent, the top 20, maybe the top 1% that are disproportionately found in a few privileged places. Okay, now the regulation of monopoly power and the financial system, because we see really a very strong sort of interdependence between the two, is something that is emerging as a prominent need. Efforts from the US Attorney Generals and the European Commission show that there is an awareness that this platform business model are due to also governments, national, supranational, failure to regulate them adequately. So, I mean, this is the main message that we want to convey, putting together these forces. And then we did, in this new paper that is in progress, will be presented in early April at the AAG. We focused on a specific item that was already in the previous paper, basing ourselves on this monopoly and finance story, how the market for acquisition reinforces regional inequalities in the US. And so the background, lots of this is precisely based on the previous work. The background is digital startups, this element that is seen as a potential important engine of local economic development. At the same time, these digital startups are very mobile because they have low fixed capital requirements, high skills, which are quite diffuse actually around the US, and there are many colleges that provide fantastic degrees in software engineering. But you see then that these startups are not equally distributed. So they produce weightless product. Apparently these are footloose, okay? Founders, we know from the literature, founders of startup in principle prefer to keep firms at home, basically where they are established. Yet there is this ecology of the big clusters, the big tech, skill labor, talent, top human capital, venture capital, finance. I mean, it's all there to give the good vibe, right? And so we see migration of these small startups to clusters, to the tech clusters, as we said, in San Francisco, Palo Alto, San Jose, is all a buzzing of this, 1-2 employee firms, okay, all with PhD. So is this, again, a simple localization economy story? Is really because high productivity is in this tech cluster? Our story, and this is just a sketch, I just wanted to show the direction because I think it's very interesting, in a nutshell, is that part of what pulls these startups to major cluster is precisely big monopolies already there. And for most, the biggest aim is not to growth by natural trajectory, but is actually acquisition by the big tech, okay? You start a firm, venture capital financing because you are prospective monopoly, you have an initial public offer, rare, because actually I wrote it down somewhere, of where is the number here? In the 3 industry sectors that we are exploring, here we find 3,508 total acquisition in the US between 1987 to 2020. In the same period, in the same 4-digit sectors, there were only 269 IPOs on NASDAQ, okay? The principal exchange for trading tech company stocks. So IPO are very rare. The main outcome is acquisition. Firms acquired by leading big tech are disproportionately to sectors, relative to the sectors in which they operate, concentrated in major tech cluster, and we will show particularly Silicon Valley. Spatial concentration of big tech acquisition targets, moreover, has grown over time, okay? So Both size and spatial concentration of the acquisition market are due to monopolies and the monopoly intrinsic nature of the big tech. Okay, acquisition are financed by monopoly profits and are instrumental in keeping the monopoly growing. Okay, and obviously a more competitive market structure would allow this new tech enterprise to be more geographically spread. We consider in this new paper the big seven. We have specific criteria to select them. Alphabet, Adobe, Apple, Facebook, and Oracle, located in Silicon Valley with headquarters in Silicon Valley, Amazon and Microsoft located in Seattle. And they are all classifiable as platform, okay? Network services, monopolies, information-based, other web-based, or proprietary general software. The startups taken over by the big tech, we consider the period that starts in 1997 to 2020. We rely on the integration of three data sources: John Van Dyke, Sapphire, Capital IQ, and SDC Platinum. But I have to say the big job here, we spent a year looking manually, searching the web, searching companies' website, validating really with a very fine grain and very long process of, industry association and company web. So we look at the location of the big tech acquisition targets and of the vendors, because obviously many of them are venture capital that acquire and then sell, compared with the location of some comparator groups, okay? All other US takeover targets, non-big tech, in the same 3 4-digit industries. And these 4-digit industries are computer programming services, 7371 in NASIC code, prepackaged software, and computer processing and data preparation progressing services. Then the second group comparator are other business invested in by the venture capital that sold firms to the tech. So this is a subsample actually of the all other US in those industry. Company in those sectors that make an API and IPO, and the companies in those sectors that received small business administration loans, so given by the federal government. So we also implemented, we did a lot of descriptive because it's probably more appropriate, and then we ran some probability regression on the probability for a startup to be acquired by a big tech as a function of location in particular, because we are interested in the geography. Now, without going into regression, because it's not here and the purpose, and it will become a bit more complicated also because I have to conclude, I want to show you the geography, okay? The geography, these are the location in metropolitan statistical areas of US big tech acquisition targets in the period considered. The total is 940, total US 645, of which 310 in San Francisco, San Jose, and non-US 266. Now, it is interesting also to look at this acquisition outside the US, okay? Our regression obviously focus on the US because it's a geography contained, but it's interesting to see, right? The London absorbed 43 out of 50 in the United Kingdom. Canada is more widespread in terms of these locations of the targets. And, you see Ile-de-France, Paris, right, absorb most of France, while Germany, Berlin is much less. As usual, Germany is more widespread, okay? In India, everything goes to Karnataka, which is Bangalore. So this is something that we will explore more in depth later on, the international geography. We focus on the US. And so you can see here geographical concentration of the big tech targets. That is a geography that is, in fact, this concentration has grown enormously over time, okay? This is the first chart is Silicon Valley share, and you can see that the tech grant, the big tech targets, okay, is the dark gray, has grown really a lot between 97, 2000, 21, 2010, and then 2011, 2020. While all the other control groups, okay, acquisition, in relevant, all the other acquisition, the SBA recipient, or the other business that were sold by the same venture capital, or the IPOs, their concentration in Silicon Valley gradually goes down, okay? And also by Herfindahl index, by across metropolitan statistical areas, we have the same trend. So it is precisely a geography, a market of targets of acquisition that is strictly related to this tech giants, okay? And finally, I want to show you these two maps that are really nice. I mean, if you look, just to understand the maps, you see that these are the big tech acquisition relative to the small business administration loans, so all the firms that have received loans, okay? Always in the 3-4 digit industries that we are looking at, only those, okay? And you can see that the color of the bubble, okay, give the share of the big tech acquisition. And if you look at, in fact, Silicon Valley, okay, it means that, you know, in Silicon Valley, the big tech acquisition are higher than the number of firms, small firms that has received SBA loans, okay? While in all the others, you can see that this share is variable, but indeed, nonetheless, okay, it constitutes in specific location a rather important share. All the white bubble obviously are places where there are no big tech acquisition, okay? The size of the ball gives the number of firms that have received. It's just a simple share, okay? Big tech acquisition over the number of firms that have received loans for business. And if we compared, and this is the last one, the big tech acquisition relative to all US acquisitions in the three industries considered, you can see, I mean, the red dots here in Silicon Valley, Santa Cruz gives you the concentration, but you can see that the places where the big tech acquisition constitute the majority are really highly concentrated in the big tech clusters, but also the financial government clusters. Okay, so finally, and here I conclude, what are the main points? The paper is still in progress, as I said, will be presented for the first time in a few weeks, is that being located in Silicon Valley is an important predictor, but both of being acquired by one of the big 7 tech, as well as of an IPO. That strong network effects that we were expecting are confirmed. So the startups that receive funding from one of the venture capitalists that has also invested in the big tech are likely to be acquired by a big tech. Okay, so you see a sort of close circuit between monopoly and finance. We find a small number 2nd-tier acquisition locations: New York, Boston, Los Angeles, Seattle, or London outside the US, okay? And the geographical concentration of these targets have grown remarkably over time, okay? Now, further research direction on the economic economic geography of monopoly. We would really like, this was a message a bit to the community. I mean, there is a lot to explore on market power, and let's re-embed market power in economic geography. Otherwise, there is a problem in interpreting inequality, and also in the choice of the various level of policy that have to intervene in order to fight inequality, is the extension to other areas of the world. Europe, I put it here because, I mean, we would like very much, Peter, to know, although we know that obviously the degree of concentration of the US market is not at all as is in Europe, but the geography of Europe is very different. But we are pretty sure that we would find some patterns. China is another interesting thing to see, to look at. And also extension to other industries, okay, industries that have not the platform kind of objective, but that are anyway monopoly based on very strong property, I mean, intellectual property rights, biotech, pharma. I mean, think about COVID, for example, and what is happening with vaccine, okay? It's not exactly the obviously a competitive market that comes to your mind. So this is all for me. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thanks very much, Simona, for a wonderful presentation. Really very interesting. Of course, what indeed comes in mind if we would compare the US with Europe, right? I'm sure that Peter will say something on that. So without any delay, I would like to go to Peter, and I'm looking forward to his intervention. So we are very pleased to have Peter, of course, on board in this particular session. So please, Peter, go ahead.
Right. Well, thank you, Ron, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you and to be with Jerome, and to have the possibility to respond to Simona's fantastic paper. I mean, it's reading it, there was so much to take away, and seeing the presentation, that there's even more. And I think, I mean, just a general comment, and I think it's a more general reflection. It's great to see economic geography engaging with some of the big macro questions, and I think that this is really something about the policy relevance of the discipline. So I think, really, Simona, you have to be congratulated for picking up some of the most difficult issues on the policymakers' table, not just for us, but across the world. Now, I want to really come at it as both of you hinted at from a European perspective. I mean, we follow US issues, but of course our main focus is in terms of European policy. And I come from a very particular policy perspective, which is about policies which are about addressing spatial disparities. And I think what is interesting is that if there is a kind of a core model that we are all trying to deal with and develop, it's one which is built around the 3 I's, essentially innovation, infrastructure, institutions. And I would say that increasingly there's a consensus among policymakers that an innovation-led growth model, together with measures aimed at reinforcing institutions, is perhaps the core to helping catch places which are lagging behind catch up. And of course, the best example in the European context of this is smart specialization policy, which is a very, very developed type of model. Now listening to Simona and reading the paper, your paper challenges to a certain extent this model. I mean, we've always known that it's not only what goes on in places which matters, but it is the more general framework conditions. But what in effect you're saying is that as policymakers trying to address the needs of less developed places which are left behind, we don't only have to try and contend with the forces of agglomeration, which are essentially driven by knowledge externalities and skill-based technological change. But your argument is that it's also the increasing power of tech firms, which manifests itself in many cases in monopoly power, and also the growing power and financialization of the financial sector. And in your paper, what you say is that this has two clear consequences. First of all, it holds back development of places outside techno-monopoly clusters. And secondly, it starves firms potentially of finance. And I think it's interesting to take this framework and put it into a European context. And I think the first issue here is that when you look through European eyes, I mean, normally from European eyes, and if you look at the big policy documents, whether coming out of capitals or out of Europe, the question has always been, why are we not developing these big, what you call techno monopoly clusters? I mean, the monopoly is your addition, but in effect, it is this ability to capture and agglomerate, which is their key feature. And this is a discussion which we've had very often in between ourselves and with Michael Storper. Does Europe need the superstar firms? Does Europe need its Silicon Valleys? And this is a big policy question because it's a focus of many member states in terms of national policies. And I think perhaps the question which this takes me, and I direct to you, is can we do without them? Can we do without them in Europe? Because this is the way European policy is going at the moment. I mean, whether or not it's successful is a different question, but I think there's a view that we have to strengthen our capacity to build capabilities in these key sectors. That said, there are significant differences in Europe, and I think I'll come back to this in the form of a question in a second. But the big difference with Europe is that Europe does have an effective competition regime, and here Arno, if you could put up the slide that I sent you a few minutes ago. Is this possible?
Arno, please, could you publish the slide? I think he will do soon, very soon.
Okay, well, I'll come back to it, but I'll come back to this in
he told me down. He told me down, but we cannot see.
Okay, well, look, perhaps it'll come up in a second.
I think the slide is on YouTube, so you can follow.
Oh, okay. So unfortunately, I don't think then Simona can't see it. But Simona, essentially the point is that we do not see the same trend in markups in Europe over the last 20 years. And in fact, I presented a slide with Bundesbank data on markups, which show that whether you're looking at high R&D intensity outside manufacturing or within manufacturing, both high and low R&D intensity sectors, there are no significant increases in markups. And in Europe, markups seem to be much more cyclically driven than by any long-term trend. So I think the notion of monopolization is right. Thank you, Ron. The trend in monopolization and monopoly rents is very, very different in Europe compared to the trends in the US. The second thing is, and this is just what I wanted to show, which was my earlier point, is that we do not see in Europe, in the second graph, this is World Bank work, European countries are orange, while non-European companies are green, and these are operating margins. But what you see is that, and these are when the bank did this work, this was the 20th, I think the 20th largest companies in the world by market value, is that you have a concentration, with the exception of SAP, of the data economy companies in the US. Mm-hmm. While Europe, its large companies are much more concentrated in either traditional manufacturing industry or services. So there's a different structure to the economy. This is linked a little bit to my question about, do we want them? The second issue I wanted to come back onto is the question of the growing power of the financial sector and access to finance. And I think that in Europe, there are not the same issues in terms of access to finance. There are a lot of public institutions, national promotional banks, which are active, very significant policies to support SMEs. So I think that it seems to me that what are the lessons for Europe? I mean, perhaps there are policies which are necessary conditions, but not sufficient, mm-hmm. because we are seeing significant issues of polarization in many European countries. And the story that we always used to tell about, the fast-growing Central and Southeastern region countries and the capitals running ahead, is now being reflected as well we look over the last 10 or 15 years, in many of the richer economies in Europe, notably France, and also, of course, the former member UK. So I think there is a very interesting comparison there. So the question there, once again, I just repeated, is what lessons can we draw? Then perhaps the final point I wanted to make, and thank you, you can take the slide off, Ron.
Can you send it to me then?
Sorry?
Can you send it to me, the slide?
I think you're already in copy of them. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
But the last issue is that, I mean, your paper comes at a very good time in policy terms, because the first thing is that I think more than any time in the last 10 or 15 years, there is an appetite to tame the tech giants on both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, every day there's an article in the Financial Times about what is going on both in Washington and what is happening in Europe. The second thing is that, I mean, in relation to your financing question, we are in extraordinary monetary conditions at the moment, and it looks like these signals from central banks suggest that these extraordinary monetary conditions are going to be maintained even through the recovery. And the latest statements from the Fed suggest that they will continue a very relaxed monetary policy at least until 2024. So there is another opportunity, and then of course, I mean, we have this once in a lifetime possibility related to the stimulus packages, both in the EU and of course in the United States. And I think the United States is interesting because there is a stronger local state government dimension than the recovery plan in Europe. So the question I would ask you is, as someone focused on policy, what is your take in terms of the opportunity for place-based policies in this broader context of major framework policy changes? So once again, many thanks for the paper, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. As usual, 3 big questions, probably the core questions. And okay, let me say that, I mean, I obviously do not have an answer because I haven't done a study on Europe. And in fact, I mean, I mentioned that because in many occasions in the last 3 years working on this, we have thoughts. How can we how can we transfer this? Okay, let me start with the first. I mean, it's just on top of my mind. Okay, also because obviously I'm not. Although I think that under the present circumstances, and this is not COVID related or anything, it became really macroscopic probably since the big recession 2008. Although, as we have seen for the US, it's a trend, the deregulation, financialization, and also change in institution, because, you know, Chicago, Bork are all impacted strongly on the institutions in the US. And so I think that asking the first question, why are we not developing Silicon Valley? Do we need a Silicon Valley actually? I would say no, we don't. We have a much more it's a different geographies, is much more widespread somehow in relative terms. We didn't go through those institutional changes. We don't have the same market structure specialization. I mean, while you were talking, I was thinking about the interesting example of Germany, that whatever indicators you look at, right? I remember 25 years ago looking at the concentration of the big multinational corporation, the largest corporation in the world in terms of R&D investment, okay, with John Cantwell. We were stunned by how much actually Germany was non-concentrated and, scattered across at least 6 or 7 landers, and not in 1 or 2 cities, as in the case basically of the UK or France. So it's something that, there are many indicators of this non-concentration, and the concentration came from this big institutional, the flexibility. I mean, flexible labor markets in Europe. Let's say the US version is in where I am here, okay, in the UK, and in fact, I would say that you might extend some of the reasoning to the UK much more than continental Europe. I don't think we need that. I don't think that we need this powerhouse of power that inevitably creates the concentration disparity at the extreme, and we need. And this is also in the spirit of the place-based. So we are doing, in a way, we are doing the right thing, okay? Also because it rests to be seen how sustainable. I hope there are some threats in front of Silicon Valley, okay? So I think that of the 3 I you mentioned, innovation, infrastructure, institutions, the biggest difference between Europe and the US is on institutions, okay? We have still, you were mentioning this, we have still public institutions, we have still public investment, we have still, not in all member states the same, but labor market institutions that are different and much more stringent, okay? There was this rhetoric a lot in the 2000s that we had to go for flexible labor market without any kind of characterization, and it happened to a certain extent, but absolutely not comparable to the US. Now, so at this point you would say, but what is the lesson for the EU? Well, we have anyway a lot of issues with this monopoly, because I've shown, although our analysis is based particularly on the US, but it can be replicated, expanding internationally, and the footprints of these monopolies are global and are concentrated in some of the hotspots, okay? And therefore resources, a mechanism of sucking away, you know, is there. I mean, London is a very clear case, okay, of drowning resources from the rest of the country and from the rest of possibly other locations in Europe. And maybe now we will see what happens in the new order of things, okay? But for sure, one of the argument of the copious literature, there was Neil before, I mean, mentioned Andres and many other colleagues also working on the UK, that London is the superstar that is absorbing resources from the rest of the country. So I think that there are lessons to be learned also because, and here is a sort of interaction between your question, opportunities for place-based. You know me, I mean, I've been one of the most passionate advocate for place-based, but, and it's the way to go. However, is not enough. Is necessary but not sufficient in a world that is globalized, and the power of the multinationals, that it's not by chance that I am going into this direction. I've studied micro and meso multinationals for more than 30 years, but now you have to go to the highest level to understand what their impact, their effect is. And, you know, it seems to me that I was mentioning the European Commission, there is a lot of debate on what is we are losing in terms of taxes, okay? And these terms, I mean, these taxes are definitely something, it's a big issue that is punishing severely, particularly those places that are either left behind or held back somewhere else. But this is not any longer a world of those monopolies that, you know, like the old phone companies in the US, they were operating at the state level and they had local footprint, really. They could, you know, they could their operation and their customer base was co-localized. These firms are not co-localized, and unfortunately it's not only big tech. In Europe, studying something like pharmaceutical or biotech would give maybe a slightly better idea of the losses of monopoly, okay? So we have to go a bit by sector in order to understand this, okay? Europe, a lot of Europe is based on tourism. To my knowledge, there is no evaluation of what is and from where, you know, the various evanescent, the booking.com or are, I mean, we had this discussion last summer when we were in, you know, in Crete, and we were talking to our landlord that was in fact losing 25% to, you know, a booking.com that is somewhere in the net, okay, for providing an interface. Okay, so I think that place-based is definitely the only perspective we have to understand what is the potential of a specific place. And, you know, we have been talking about it for the last 6 years together. But on the other hand, missing the macro at this point is becoming more and more damaging. And here is a regulatory issue. As we all know, Europe has problems in addressing it because not everybody agrees, and there are different taxation let's say, inclinations also in Europe, right? With Brexit, we have seen something going out. I was reading yesterday on Social Europe on a blog that the UK, with its network of overseas territories and crown dependencies, often referred to as spider web, is responsible for 30% of the 245 billion the world loses to corporate tax abuse. But it's not only the UK, okay? So it's all resources that are sucked by competitive small firms that do stuff, okay? That is not growing exponentially, but we still need stuff, right? So this is something that we have to tackle. This is, you know, the dark side of capitalism that my friend Elisa Giuliani is you know, researching and actually denouncing. Let me finish on one other thing, that this is not only a problem of taxes, I think, Peter, is a problem of labor markets that are changing, is the problem of the gig economy that is not completely outside Europe only. And we see the increasing footloose force, the various Uber or you know, Amazon forces of labor that are not, although, I mean, again, in Europe we are stricter, and we had some recent won battles, but in California, the referendum to make them regular as workers lost, okay, because the big corporation invested something like $200 million against the referendum. So this is the world we live in. And to conclude, place-based is something that is specific and has to be. On the other hand, the big picture is this another condition without which we cannot go on. Top down, bottom up, different layers. I mean, you know, we have known that for a long time, but I think we have reached the point where it is inevitable to integrate.
Thank you. I think very complete answers. I could come back. We could talk about this all evening. But Ron, I think perhaps you'd like to give the opportunity for some questions to Simona from the audience.
Well, yes. Well, we have still. I think we have still plenty of time. I think if you would like to respond to Simona, fine for me. I can also put in some questions I received. Not too many yet, but of course I might also have questions myself.
No, I think just one comment. I think, Simona, where you're absolutely right is this idea that we can do place-based policies in autarky, as it were, is over, even in relation to national legislation. And I think, I mean, particularly your point about the extraterritorial impact of competition or legislation, and the fact that, you know, just by the US having a very relaxed policy creates a gravity which, in spite of our policy, which is relatively restrictive, has significant impacts on our economy. And I think that's a very important consideration as well.
We need to think about it. I mean, together, really together, all the community that is, I cannot see, because it's important, because you know, it's a matter of social contract also. It's becoming a matter of what people believe, and it's a long term. I mean, you remember, Peter, that it was years ago already that we talked. I mean, I was obsessed with this thing of considering the regions open, okay? What gets in, what gets out, because if you don't look at the networks, the global production network, global value chains, you are not able to precisely to implement your policy that maybe is the perfect one, but is an interdependent world. It's not. It has to be aligned somehow.
So, and I fully agree. And as you and Ron know, I mean, the new policy frontier is the extra regional dimension of place-based policies.
Yeah.
And I think, we're starting to develop some analytical tools to better understand it. But, this is the start of a process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also indeed those interregional linkages that you refer to, I think what is still missing, I think here Simona is on top, is also take into account the power relationships in those interregional linkages, right? So it's more, it's not so much about the number or the complementarities that we measure, but what can you actually exploit, and who is exploiting the relationship in a way, right? So you would include power relationship. I think that would be a way to go forward, which I think would be a very interesting research question by itself for future research.
Yeah.
I don't think this really has been taken up that much, to be honest, because it would mean that you merge, you bring together two types of literatures that have more or less become have developed independently from each other, right? In isolation from each other. Yeah. On the one hand, it's knowledge networks, right? And then we see to what extent they're inside regions or outside regions, but there's no power relationship content in that. So I think we should link the two. So that I think would be.
This work, and actually, thank you for the great words, Peter. I have also to credit my co-authors, Marianne and Frederick, and now also Caroline, that are, I mean, it's a collective, really collective work, and power. I mean, Ron, monopoly power, right? So it's precisely this bringing back this in our discourses, as you said.
Yeah, but I think also I think we are not yet keen so much on when we look, for example, at knowledge flow, in what direction they go and who is exploiting what, right? So it's we more or less assume that most of those relationships are just symmetric. Well, of course, in reality, they're not, right? So if there's one essential feature of the capitalist system, is that all relationships are asymmetric in terms of trade, in terms of, but also in terms of knowledge flows. And I'm not sure whether we at least take that up very seriously in our research framework so far. So I think there's still a lot to be gained there.
No, perhaps, Ron, I can just agree with you. I mean, I think that I mean, as soon as you're talking about economic development, and you're talking about places which are left behind or less developed regions, and you're talking about linkages, you're talking about private companies. And there, every time we talk to our partners in the regions about this is their primary issue. They say, how do we engage with an actor who is international, who sees us as a resource as opposed to a partner? And I think that you're absolutely right, and this is a crucial policy issue.
Okay, Simona, I had some questions, also a few of them myself, if I'm allowed, and I'm a chair, so I am. What I would like to ask you is, to what extent would you also like to consider what happens after acquisitions, right? Because it is a major debate, I know, in entrepreneurship study, although I'm not really an expert in that field, is that, okay, if you are acquired, what happens with those investments that have been made? Are they just killed? or will, let's say, the ones that are acquired given the opportunity to develop further, right? Which, of course, from a welfare point of view, is a pretty essential point to be made. I don't think it will change your story about regional inequalities, but from a welfare point of view, it's quite an essential issue. Because many scholars have raised many concerns about that the ones that are being acquired, and those can be really, well, the very good companies, right? The companies that really did well are taken over by those big tech companies, and the big tech companies are not, they might not be really interested in that, or they lose interest over time in the activities they have acquired with all kinds of welfare losses. How do you think that you could take up in your framework in that respect? Would that be an essential issue, or?
Look, I mean, we have reviewed the literature. Obviously, in this paper, in this analysis, what we are focusing on is the location of the targets, okay? The location. So in looking at all the acquisition of the 7 big, we have collected an enormous amount of qualitative information, which, however, cannot be, you know, as you know, Ron, I mean, one paper, one idea, otherwise becomes a sort of encyclopedia. But we might be able to go in a different direction later on and look at the strategies, because this paper is not about strategies. It's really the literature that has investigated this, and it's reviewed already in the paper. For example, there is a very interesting special issue in information economics and policy with you know, big economists such as Motta, Katz, Cabral. There is a paper by Kamepalli, Rayan, and Zingales about this. And actually, this literature, some is theoretical, but some also looks at some evidence, always on this big, depending, sometimes are 3, sometimes are 5. We get the largest number and the longest period, but our, you know, this literature has different views. However, the common themes are a deleterious effect of platform acquisition on innovation, okay? And the fact that the vast majority of this acquisition evade investigation. There is also the problem that turnover of this acquired digital startup is so low that it falls below the threshold required to trigger intervention, okay? And there is a general sense that emerges from this literature, okay, that tightening the restriction could improve also the innovation in a sense, because you are scrutinized more, okay? There is quite a strong evidence, is qualitative evidence, because it's tricky to go into, that says that the aim is to kill innovation, okay? Because obviously a prospective monopoly open up a potential different platform, and therefore it is more in a sense, I mean, you know, keeping the status quo is easier Some are incorporated
Yes.
into the big tech.
But I think what was very interesting what you started with, right? So those are those startups, right?
Yeah.
And they move to Silicon Valley and then are eaten, right? So so that leads to more spatial concentration. But what you could expect is that also the big tech companies that are located in Silicon Valley and have those targets in other parts of the US, as you showed, right? What happens with those targets in New York or Washington or Florida or Texas, things like that? Because indeed, if they are killed, it would even mean you increase regional inequalities. But you could also expect something else, that also those targets could also get new boosts because they are now part of a big tech company and they will get new capital, things like that, right? So that can also happen.
Well, I mean, these are acquisitions, okay? We looked in particular, we focused not to acquisitions, means that that firm doesn't exist any longer, okay?
But the facility can still continue.
Aspetta, wait for a second because there is a problem that I don't hear you. Sorry.
Aha.
Yeah, now I hear you. It was just a second.
No, all I'm saying is that, of course, you can be acquired, but you can still continue as a business, right? So, and you can even grow because you will get all kinds of benefits from the big tech company in terms of capital, in terms of skilled labor, things like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, we are, for the moment, I would say it's quite clear that this reduces as a reduction of competition effect. Now, right. It would be very difficult to disentangle those innovations that are carried out, that, you know, continued, and those that are completely discontinued, because then you are within the corporation.
Yes.
And so it's something that is very difficult to follow. I don't know if there might be some way, probably, and it's something that it's actually a great idea that I've written down, how to continue tracing that. But we rely on this very recent literature, because all these papers on the big tech are 2020, 2021 even, okay, are published online only, has very strong doubt on, let's say, the overall amount of innovation created. So let's say socially beneficial, although I'm not sure if it is, you know, englobated in a monopoly, if it is really socially social welfare maximizing.
Okay, I have another question, if I may, from the audience. I like that one. Very few countries create the technologies that drive this revolution. Most of them are created in China and the US, but all countries will be affected by it. Do you see developing countries prepared for the consequences?
Well, it's a very long-term debate, this, right? And we cite some very recent 2020 work by Lundvall, Ben-Åke Lundvall, and a co-author that is precisely looking into that. Part of the problem is, I mean, you know, monopoly power is something that definitely harms weaker locations in strong advanced economies, and you know, it is even more so in the case of less advanced economies. We can see examples of this precisely also in ours, little data here, the case of Bangalore, right? I mean, the case of Bangalore is quite significant, has been studied a lot by many colleagues, also my colleague Suma Freie. You know, it's a model that has been trying to be replicated, but has some buts in terms of inequality quite strong, and the spillovers across are not really verified. Okay, it is Bangalore, and so. You know, there are other forms, moreover, of harm and exploitation on developing emerging economies by these big conglomerates. And Peter knows I'm looking at another side of that is, you know, reliance on natural resources. And the innovation-based intensive of these natural resources, again, is concentrated in the hands of the corporations, not in the hands of those that actually own the natural resources, okay? I'm talking about conflict minerals or critical materials in general. So, it's, you know, again, precisely for this, the place-based approach is crucially important to understand what can be done for a reason, for a region or a place, wherever in the world. But at the same time, I strongly believe that there has to be, at this point, a global regulation, which is, you know, if we think about how difficult it is to get continental regulation or national regulation, think about global. But I mean, you know, if we speak up all together, I mean, you know, we might find also in line with, you know, developing economies, we should find a way, because otherwise the scenario is a bit Orwellian, but.
Yes. Okay, I think we have about 5 minutes to go. I think I would like to ask you a last question. And I think that the type of topic that you are addressing really is very original and innovative, right? So, and probably will bring into existence a whole new research agenda. If you think about this new research agenda, which I think is very promising, and as Peter said, is also very high policy relevance and actually makes economic geographies work on topics that really matter, right? That also policymakers care a lot about and want to know more. What would you think are the most promising avenues in future research to exploit more fully this topic on monopolies and regional inequalities? What is what we do not yet know, and that research could focus on in the years to come? What do you think are the most essential questions to take up?
You know, Ron, we touch upon many of them. Okay, now that I was thinking about the previous question on emerging developing countries, I mean, you know, we are talking about big tech, but think about Monsanto grip on all kind of seeds that are sold to farmers in Latin America as proprietary, okay, because of an IPR, okay? Yeah. So the consequences for poverty of this sort of things are huge. Now, I think that there is no one avenue, okay? We are many here, and, you know, I have predicated for now decades that we don't know enough about global companies. We are struggling in studying, and I've been studying inward FDI or outward FDI, location choice. I cannot do, and still with colleagues like Riccardo Crescenzi, but a strong in-depth comparison of, impact on labor markets. We cannot do it at the European level. No. The best you can do is take one country and dig down in the data of the National Statistical Office. And also there are many restrictions. So we don't know a lot. Okay, this implication for labor, I think, is a very big thing. And I want to close on a reading that is not at all academic, but I'm reading this book. I was looking if I had it because I don't remember the author, but it's Jessica Sutter is Nomadland, which is just, there is also film, apparently. I haven't seen, but about Amazon workers that are living in trucks. And it's thousands and thousands of people that give up, having a permanent dwelling and moving from a camp to another for less than $11 per hour, but seasonal workers, as we have, people from Northern Africa to pick up tomatoes in Southern Europe. We now have people moving across the states and working for Amazon. We know, these are big issues. These are, I was talking with Frederick and Marianne about this book, and, she saw the film, and we were saying, from where are these workers? I'm pretty sure that it would be interesting to look at the geography behind, okay? So there are so many manifestations, and we know so little about this open regions. Why so far what Peter was mentioning about, we cannot go for this autarky in place-based, but the reason why we are stuck with that is that we still do not know a lot. We cannot really compare. Make comparison is very difficult. So we need a lot of efforts. And so whoever has a good idea to proceed on these big themes, okay, you see, Elisa is working on more on ethic issue. There are others that are looking at environmental implications. We are looking at economic inequality, but is complex, and it's also, I believe, strongly multi-methods, because a lot of this research cannot really only be done on the basis of quantitative methodologies. And we learn so much about this little, story on the geography of acquisition of the big tech by looking at website of companies and validating. And so it's more and more probably interdisciplinary and intermethodological, for sure. So
absolutely. Okay, Simona, I thank you very much. I thank Peter for his wonderful feedback on the presentation of Simona. I really enjoyed it very much. I think it was a very clear and good presentation, and indeed the comments were excellent. So thank you both for contributing to this workshop. Of course, as Jerome said, it will also be put online as a link, right? So the whole presentation and the whole discussion have been recorded. So it will be made available as soon as possible, and so people can look at it, could look at it for quite some time. So I'm sure that many people will have a look and see what has been said. So thanks very much for the both of you. It was a wonderful session. Thanks for all the people that attended, which of course in this terrible Corona times we cannot see. We maybe feel a bit that you're around, but we cannot see you, and we cannot hug you after the session and have a beer after. But anyway, that's the way it is. So we hope also for better times in that respect. I hope to see you all soon, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.